Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and today I have an absolute treat for you, a fellow attorney. Now, I'm not an attorney, but fellow to you, my listener, a fellow attorney who has achieved what most of you would look at as a massive amount of success. Maybe there's some larger firms out there that might say, he's still got a ways to go, but this is quite impressive. I just finished having a conversation with him in the green room before we hit record, and I'm in awe with what he has built over his career. 293 employees, two states, 18 offices, 63 attorneys. This is just a massive law firm, and I'm so excited to jump into a conversation with him to talk about his journey and talk about what his challenges were. What are his best kept secrets that he's going to share with you on how to grow your law firm. Really, really excited to have a conversation with our guest today. And I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. But before I do, I want to remind you, if you haven't been paying attention to the last few episodes, I've been talking about this idea of joining our coaches for a free coaching session. So if you're sitting there trying to make things tick, trying to make things move in your law firm, trying to get past where you've been treading water for the last who knows how long, and you can't figure out why you're not able to just succeed to your wildest expectations, then maybe it's worthwhile for you to spend 45 minutes on the phone with one of our coaches on a Zoom call. They are really good at what they do. They will help you dive into what might be preventing you from moving forward, what might be holding you back, and really getting clear on what it is that you really want and how to get there. So if you're interested, we only open up a few slots a month, and you want to grab yours before it's too late. Go to profitwithlaw.com/free coaching. profitwithlaw.com/free coaching. Our guest today is James Farrin, and I'm going to call him Jim for the rest of the show, because apparently if we're friends, then I get to call him Jim, and you guys are going to be friends with him by the end of the show. So you're going to call him Jim too. But Jim is the president of law offices of James Scott Farrin. Already told you about the firm. It's the largest plaintiffs firm in North Carolina. He grew the firm from 2 employees to almost 300, like we just covered, across the country. His law firm is one of the lead law firms in the Black farmers case. You can read more about that at www.farrin.com/black-farmers. We're going to link that up in the show notes. Farrin is with 2 R's, Farrin. We'll link that up in the show notes. I know you're in the shower, out for a run, driving your kids to school while you're listening to us. So all you got to do is go to profitwithlaw.com, look at the latest episode, and we'll have a beautiful write-up on this, including all these links. He was able to develop the firm to run like a business and utilize marketing. Jim, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Moshe.
So I like to start every single episode with the same question, because our listeners probably don't know who you are. Maybe if we have listeners in North Carolina or an area where your firm is located, they probably know who you are. But the rest of our listeners are like, who is this guy? Where did they drum him up? So tell me a little bit about your background, your story, how you got to where you are today, the Cliff Notes version, but just let our listeners know who Jim Farrin is.
Sure. It's important to know my dad was a businessman, and my mother was very much was a social worker and what I call a do-gooder. And so I think as a product of both of that, I think it led me on my journey to find a position in the law, helping people, but also running like a business. But I didn't start out that way. I went to Duke Law School here in North Carolina, and I thought big law was the way to go. So I worked at a big law firm in California and hated it, found no meaning doing that. And I was almost considering, and I saw there were no lawyers in my family. I didn't really know what to do, and sort of by accident joined a friend and started doing some personal injury work. And there I found my calling, because I could connect and help people, but also get paid not on the basis of the hours I worked, but on the results I achieved. And so it lent itself really well to applying business principles. So 1997, I put out my own shingle and started with one employee. And really the goal was, I didn't try to build I had no ambition to build an empire. It was just to support myself doing something that was meaningful and I thought I was good at. And worked it and started getting some good results. And I guess after a little bit of time, I started setting my sights higher. It's like I used to run when I was in high school. And there was one race where I thought I would finish at the bottom. I wouldn't do well, but I just started running the race and I saw somebody ahead of me. I said, I'm going to go pick that person off, and got there. And I started passing person after person and won the race. So the sort of ambition can sometimes develop over time with interim goals. And so I think the ambition kicked in for me when I realized I was successful and liking it. And I guess maybe, I had my father as a business person as a role model, and thought, I'm going to set a goal to build the most successful plaintiff's law firm in North Carolina. I did that when we weren't the most successful firm in our building, let alone the city, our county, or our state. But I had this vision, and decide, and once you have a vision, you go after, you start committing the resources, and it focuses you. And so we just started going after that, hiring really good people, marketing, and plowing more. I always reinvested a lot of the profits from the firm. My goal was not to make as much money as possible in a given year, but to build a business. And so I always believed in reinvesting and increasing the marketing budget. And so one thing has led to another. And after 25 years, we just had our 25-year anniversary. We're at this size right now.
It's really incredible. And I love your analogy of the race that you ran, and just focusing on getting ahead of the next runner. I'm not a big fan of my clients focusing on the competition, because I believe there's enough business for everybody. But I do see the value in focusing on who's the next size law firm above me, and let's just focus on outtaking them and getting ahead of them. Especially if you have a competitive spirit, it gives you something to really focus on and lean into. So I love that. I really want to spend some time focusing on the early days of your journey, if that's okay with you. First, let me just check in with your family structure, if that's okay. Are you married? Do you have kids? What is your personal situation?
Yeah, I'm married. It's a second marriage. We've been married almost 15 years, have two stepchildren and two beautiful daughters. One is going to law school right now, not going to join the family business, I hope. But I'm married with adult children.
Yeah, so I have a similar situation, except that I have a nice big gap with my kids. So I was married, got divorced, got married again. I have three grown daughters. My oldest actually works here in the business. Mimi, you may have interacted with her at some point. And then I've got three little ones. I've got a 6, almost 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and Derek, who's going to be 1 very soon. I talk about them quite a bit on the podcast. Our listeners are well familiar, but the reason I ask is because a lot of people they try to find correlations between their journey and your journey, and one of the first places they go is, he's a single guy, doesn't have responsibilities, that's why he was able to achieve success. So I want to make sure that we got the right picture of who we're dealing with, and what you had going on in your personal life as you built this business. So going back to the early days when you first started, do you remember how long it took until you were bringing home a income that you felt was covering your needs and you didn't have to worry about where the next dollar was coming from? How long in your journey did that take?
Maybe a couple years. Now, I had been out of law school 7 years before I launched the firm. So I had some money. I'd been able to pay off law school debts and had made some financial progress. So I wasn't starting from a point of nothing. But probably after 2 years or so of running this firm myself. I felt secure, not rich, but secure, fairly secure financially. I was making what I thought to be a decent living.
Okay. Now, another thing that you mentioned is that when you started with an employee. And I think that that's one of the big mistakes that a lot of lawyers make when they start their law firm is they try to start it by themselves with absolutely no support whatsoever. And that was quite a genius move of yours. Was that inspired by where you were coming from big law? Like, how did you know that you needed to start with a staff member?
Well, I thought about it because I wanted to keep my expenses down, and it was tempting to just keep the expenses down at first. But I thought that that would really hinder my productivity, and that by investing in a staff person, it would free me up to do higher end work and thus generate more revenue. And so I looked at it kind of as a return on investment, and I've kind of have stayed true to that philosophy throughout. We're always adding people and building for the future. And I think that I would run into trouble if I measured myself each year by how much money did I make at the end of this particular year, because the way to do that is to suddenly cut back on marketing or trim your expenses and things like that, which will hurt you in the long run. And so for me, the mentality has been, let's make sure we're profitable and we can pay the bills and have a comfortable life. But beyond that, let's reinvest and let's build more for the future. And so it started with that first decision of having an employee along with me.
Yeah, I love that. Now, when you started, did you bring a book of business with you, or were you starting purely from scratch?
No, I had I had worked at another personal injury law firm. This was the friend. Our partnership did not work out. I felt like some promises were not honored. So I left. And since I knew a lot of the cases and a lot of the clients, a number of them opted to go with me. So it was about 20 clients or so that I started the law firm with. Still modest, but there were cases in progress.
Yeah, and that really helps, especially when you're working on a contingency practice that you already have the wheels in motion for some of your initial cash infusions. Do you remember if you invested any savings in the firm when you started, and what that dollar amount might have been?
At first it was minimal. Just had a family. $20,000-$30,000 to get through the first year, and after a while we broke even. The big change though came in the year 2000. We had a big case that resolved in 1999, and I decided at that point, in the spirit of reinvestment, to go on TV and to do that in a big way, and that dramatically increased the expenses for the firm. To do that, I had to borrow a huge amount of money, and actually my dad led the way, pledged a lot of their retirement as security for a bank loan to allow us to fund the advertising campaign and scale the law firm. So I guess I'd say I was very fortunate to have a wealthy, loving, supporting parent to provide that little turbo boost that I needed early on.
It's very interesting that you share that story, because I mean, a lot of our listeners are not going to be able to relate with going like on TV for marketing, right? But what they can relate to is not having the capital necessary to make the next investment in their firm. And you went to your parents and they pledged their retirement. You had to be pretty darn sure that this was a bet that was going to pay off to take that risk and risk your parents livelihood for the rest of their years to do it. So what process did you go through when analyzing it to really come out and say, I'm fairly confident that this is the next best move for my firm?
Yeah, right. That's a good question, Moshe. Let me clarify. I funded out of the big case that I resolved the first 4 months of the TV campaign, and the contract allowed me to get out after 4 months if I was dissatisfied. So I was going to prove the concept myself, and I wanted to see how many cases I would bring in. I knew from being in PI for a number of years at that point that if I brought in a certain number of cases, I could project out how much the revenue would be down the road and how long basically it would take to do that. So when I went to them and asked for the money, it was after I had sort of proven the concept and I had a great deal of confidence. And it was actually after every commercial bank in town turned me down. And they were sort of the lenders of last resort. And it was really their idea. But anyway, I did prove the concept first. So I didn't recklessly ruin their inheritance, their money.
Yeah, I didn't think you did, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand how you went about your decision making. I mean, clearly you were successful and have built this massive law firm. So anything that we can learn from that is really important. And I think that the big lesson here is you tried it first, right? I mean, you needed a proof of concept and you invested and took a stab at it. And one of the things that I talk about a lot on this podcast is a lot of people hold back because they're afraid of what if it doesn't work. And what I try to explain all the time is that the only way to overcome fear is to actually take the action, is to try it, because what's the worst that can happen is it doesn't work and you have a failed investment. So in this case, yeah, it was a big investment for those first 4 months, but rather than going into the bigger contract and risking your parents' retirement from the get-go, you took that little bit to say, okay, let me have a 4-month runway to test this and see if it's going to work. If it doesn't, okay, we lost whatever that money was that we invested, whether it was 5 figures, 6 figures, I have no idea, but it's a small price to pay to find out this is not going to work for me. But what if it does work?
Yeah, and I think that's right. And once you have confidence that something is going to work, which needs to be proved, I think that a lot of people are afraid of taking on debt. And I think there is a place for debt. Now I'm not for excess personal consumer debt, but in building a business, if you've got a good idea and you've proven it's going to work, you can fast forward development by borrowing money, because the rate of return on the investment can exceed the borrowing costs greatly. And so I was always in those early years fairly aggressive. First of all, we paid off my parents, but then we were able to get banks to loan us money. And I was fairly aggressive at using a line of credit for marketing to jumpstart our growth, not for lavish personal expenses.
Yeah, I really love this part of your story. I'm curious about the results of the TV ads. I mean, did that really move the needle on your business? I mean, that just going on TV started bringing in a ton of work for you?
Yes. Now this is the year 2000, 2001. TV, maybe things are somewhat different now, although I still think TV is a powerful medium. We went at it. We advertised a lot. The old saying, go big or go home, applied, and we went big. It was very powerful. We still advertise a lot on TV, and I think it just creates brand awareness, and it makes the other channels all stronger. Our internet responses are better in markets where we're well branded from TV, as opposed to when we're not. So yeah, we went after TV in a big way, and it did immediately lead to cases. It still does, but now I think it's also just getting our name out there so that when people are on a wreck, we're the name they think of.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to TV as a medium, there are certain types of TV that are not going away anytime soon, like sports. People have to watch sports as it's happening. You're not going to record it on a DVR and watch it 3 days later. The rest of the shows that are out there, might be the case. So there's certainly places, pockets in TV where you're fairly certain that your commercials are still going to be seen by at least part of the population. There's a lot of different places that we could dig into, but going back to your very first time bringing on another attorney, talk to me about how you navigated that decision. How do you know it was time to add an attorney? And did you find that search to be difficult, or did you just lean into your network and bring somebody you already knew?
It was not it turned out to be the wrong decision. The first attorney I added was someone I knew who had the idea of complementing our personal injury practice with a traffic ticket practice, which is a volume operation. And she knew what she was doing in that area. And she said, well, let's do it. And so I brought her on as kind of as an experiment to see how it worked. After a few months, I realized I really didn't like it. The margins were not the same. It seems obvious now, but there was just a lot of work for a little, and it just didn't go anywhere. So we parted ways, and that was the story with the first attorney. And I will say that along the way, we've tried a lot of different things. Not everything has worked out. When that's okay. I think we're judged by our successes, not our failures. As long as we learn from our failures and cut them quickly. And this was certainly a case of making a mistake, but realizing it and moving on quickly.
Okay. I love the idea of bringing in traffic tickets as a marketing attempt rather than another profit center for the firm, because it exposes you to a whole audience of people who can have experiences with your firm and are now clients of yours. And if they're getting traffic tickets, they're likely to get into an accident at some point too. So it's an interesting avenue to think about. But I've had clients in the past that have had traffic ticket practices, and you're absolutely right. It's high volume, and it's really difficult to make money there. My understanding is that the most lucrative cases are the ones where you're like somebody with a CDL and you're trying to salvage their license or get them to license back, and that's really where the money is at. But you got to go through a lot of tickets to get those cases. Don't want to focus there because that's not your focus. But I do want to ask you this, since we're talking about you're not remembered by your failures, but the business owners remember their failures very well. What is the biggest mistake you made in all these years? Like the biggest misstep you've had? What was it? How big was it? And what did you learn from it? And how long did it take you to overcome that psychologically and financially?
Well, I have two. If I have to name one, it was this decision very early on when we were on TV to sue the North Carolina State Bar. Now, they had given approval to one of our commercials, and it was airing, and then they took it back and said it was misleading the public. It was a dramatization that made fun of insurance companies, showing that they were kind of afraid when they heard we were on the other side representing an injured person. So they thought that was misleading the public. And so just out of principle, said, I'm not going to take this. We fight for our clients. I'm going to fight for myself. And so we sued the state bar. I really didn't think this through because we ended up going up and losing the case at the district court level. The judge issued a scathing opinion, sort of mocking me. They still teach that course in law school, in legal ethics, and so
what not to do, right?
Well, no, it's Well, Farrin v. Thigpen is just about misleading TV commercial, not sort of associated with that. That was a poor decision because I didn't think through that. Even if we had won, the state bar could have easily just they would have said, okay, your commercial's allowed. Now we're going to change the rules, and you have to appear in your own commercial. They could have gotten their way 100 different ways. And so the idea of suing your regulator, I would not recommend to anybody who wants to be successful in business. So as a result of that, we got very serious about ethical compliance and making sure we ran everything by the bar and don't fight them, be model citizens and go along with what they want. So that was lesson number one. If you have time for a second failure, I'll tell you.
Yeah, let's go. Let's dig in.
In the about 2003 or 4, there was a class action involving fen diet drugs, which it was a second round of a class action. The first class action had been very successful, and we went all in after that. I think we borrowed $1 million, advertised in 6 markets, signed up 2,800 people, were highly invested in this case. And it was almost out of boredom. I thought, well, we're running a routine practice here. We're doing well. Let's go after something big. And it turned out that case, we thought it was going to bring in a ton, that it was going to be, we'd get rich. And it turned out that the case took so much longer than we thought. The class action settlement was put on hold. The court audited all the people, and it took 5 years. We thought it would take 6 months, and at the end of the 5 years, we got our $1 million back in fees, and that's about it. And in the meantime, I had hamstrung the firm because we had been so committed to this side venture. And so, kind of the lesson for me there was, it's okay to go after some other things, probably, but if you're going to do that, make sure that you're not borrowing from your core and you're paying attention to what really works for you and is paying the bills, and don't take that for granted and don't neglect that.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of lessons in this experience that you had, and this idea of not forgetting what your main business is and how much you need dedicated to it, and make sure that you have the excess available to focus on this new endeavor. One of the things that I did with this is my own experience with our law firm growth summit. So our summit it's a virtual conference. It's very well known in the small firm community. And our first event was in 2019, was before COVID. So there was no event like it before that. And we brought in over 2,300 law firm owners into that event. And our pricing model was a free ticket. And then after that, they were offered the option to purchase the recording, so that we didn't sell anything until after they registered for free. The next event was during COVID, and I really stepped up the production of it and invested a lot of money in the production. And because of that, I said, you know what, this is like a real conference. It just happens to be virtual. We should be charging as if you're going to a conference. And we put the tickets up for sale without having a free option on the front. We were 2 weeks out from the event, and we had sold something like 40 or 45 tickets. And the previous one, we had 2,300 registrants, which resulted in 350 purchase tickets behind those free registrations. And I went to my business coach and shared with him what was happening. And he said, well, you made too big of a change, right? You had a model that was working and you just completely changed the model. Go back to the original model. And we did. In the final 2 weeks before the event, we actually matched the numbers from before. We got 2,300 registrants to the event, and we ended up selling about 450 paid tickets, and saved our butts, because we have sponsorships, right? And if our sponsors had showed up to a room of 40 people, they would have been pretty upset with the amount that they paid for that spot. So the lesson learned was, if something's working, don't deviate 100% from it. Like, don't, if you take a complete 180 or 360 instead of just veering a little bit off course, chances are you're gonna step in some poop. So and I love that experience that you had, and it's really important for us to stick to that. It's almost, there's almost a parallel between your two mistakes, right? Because what was the first one was going into traffic tickets, and that was a completely different practice area, nothing to do with what you were doing. It might have made more sense to bring somebody on who did med mal, right? So it's the same business model, and same audience, but a different area of expertise to get it done. And you've learned those lessons the hard way, but that's the benefit of having you here, right? Our listeners can learn the lessons the easy way from you, right? So I love that you've shared those honestly. I want to fast forward or rewind. I'm not sure where we're up to in your journey, but I want to fast forward to, okay, I've got a few attorneys in place. We've got business coming in, and this, I don't know if this is after you're on TV or before. What did you find the challenges were in that stage of growth? I imagine that when you had more than one attorney on staff, at that point, you probably had some systemized processes of how to get things done. You probably had a handle on your finances. The basic core operations was in place. So what do you remember, if you look back then, what your biggest challenge was during that period of growth?
It was twofold. One was building systems that would scale. You're going, as you grow, I think systems and processes become much more important, just to stay organized and to stay ahead. I started with a manual case management system, lists, that I would write. That worked with 20 cases. That worked at 50 cases. It was strained at 100 cases. And at some point you outgrow that. And so we had to go to a case management system and then develop a bunch of processes. So one was developing out processes. The other really was making sure that we hired people who not only were good at what they did, but shared the same values and beliefs. And I think we're a lot better at recruiting those people these days than we were in the early days. I don't think we had really nailed down what intangibles we were looking for. And so we were hiring people just with experience, and a lot of them just were not good fits for us. So in the early days, turnover was higher and we just made a lot of hiring mistakes. And I think that was the challenge. Later on, I think we really nailed down our culture and what our values are. And that has made it so much easier to attract the right people to the team.
So staffing and entrenched in culture, in other words, making sure that you're putting the right staff members in place. It's got to be the right fit, as my my friend Gino Wickman says. I got the book over my shoulder. And he in his book Traction, he talks about the EOS system, and one of the big things is that there's two pieces for every employee. There's the right fit for the organization and the right seat for the person. You need to make sure both of them are correct. Otherwise, that person's not going to be set up for success, and it's going to end up being a bad hire. I'm a big disciple of Michael Hyatt, and I've heard him share where they use they use the EOS system. They use the Kobe index in their hiring process. They had somebody that scored really well with the company core values, but didn't do so well on the Kobe index, and they pushed it anyway. They said, let's put him in place. And the person ended up being a big letdown, right? They thought he was going to be this big hotshot in the firm and in their company. And it wasn't working out. And then they realized, hey, one second, if he matched our core values, just didn't match in the Kobe, he's probably in the wrong seat. And they sat down and looked at that and said, let's put him over here. Let's give him a different role and see how he does. And all of a sudden he took off and is still with the company and very, very successful for them. So it's really important to get those two pieces right in the hiring process and in the growth process. But speaking of staff members really buying into the values of the firm and holding the torch of the firm, because you really need people who are going to go all in for you. Are there things that you have in place that you do, incentives, various ways of recognition, things like that really help motivate your staff to meet certain objectives and things like that?
Yeah, I think that we're, first of all, relentless in communicating. I want to make sure that we're transparent about our plans, how we're doing. Now, we don't share bottom line profit information, but we'll tell you on a percentage basis how we're doing. So we have a quarterly all hands firm meeting where I'll go over our vision traction organizer. We're also use the traction tools and talk about, here are our issues, here are our rocks for this quarter, here's where we're heading. Beyond that, each month I have what we call a brown bag lunch, where any employee can submit any questions that's on their mind, and I will answer the question honestly. So I'm getting their questions unearthed and answered. I'll send out stories from each department of their greatest success story of the month, and send that out firm-wide. And then the last thing we do is a ton of positive reinforcement. I really have learned that to motivate people, I used to be kind of critical. I think maybe there's the lawyer in me that was always looking for the downside of a case or even a person, and harp on the negative and try to coach them out of that, and really worked poorly. And so I think that we've had much more success when we've looked for positives, not ignoring mistakes, but really focusing on reinforcing the positive behavior, building people up, and that we've gotten a lot more out of people by doing that. And so if someone does something good, works extra hours, goes the extra mile for a client, comes up with a new idea, we have a peer nominate them for an award, and we publish all these people who've received this recognition. And then every quarter in our quarterly meeting, we'll draw out random prizes for the people who are in that pool. So that is just a combination of things that have really worked for us to communicate well and motivate. I think people want communication. They want to understand where they're going. They want to be appreciated. And that's where this positive reinforcement and recognition comes in. If you do those two, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, good. I really appreciate that. One thing that are you familiar with Craig Goldenfarb?
No.
So Craig Goldenfarb has a PI attorney in South Florida, a PI firm in South Florida. He's quite successful. He does a one-day workshop called the 7-Figure Attorney or something like that. He was a guest here on the podcast, and folks will link up his episode in the show notes. You can go listen to that. It's a great episode. But I went to his 7-Figure workshop and sat in there, and he shared some of this kind of stuff with the audience of what they do to motivate their staff. And he one thing he said, it works amazingly well for him, that you would never think that this would do the trick. But they set their goals for the quarter, and if the team hits a certain metric, then they bring in a food truck for lunch. And he said the food truck cost them $1,500, something like that, to bring in and feed everybody. And it's amazing how that little thing really drives the needle and motivates people to, okay, if we do this, we're going to get a food truck. So sometimes you just have to think outside the box with something that doesn't have to be lavish or extravagant, that can really change things. Now, obviously, if you have one employee, you're not bringing a food truck in, but the idea is there, especially for people who have multiple staff members in the office. I want to focus on marketing for a moment. So one of the big things that people grapple with is not just should I invest in marketing, but how should I invest in marketing, and where should I put my marketing dollars? And I think that you probably have gone through multiple iterations of that throughout the growth of your firm, because as you grow, you have to look in different places, right? And once I've got TV going, what else? Where else can I put my money? Where else can we market? If you look back at the early days of marketing, I mean, maybe when you started, there were still yellow pages. I don't know. I'm guessing there was, and you had to make that commitment for the year, and it was quite expensive. But that was basically, if you weren't in there, you were losing most of the business because the internet didn't exist. Now our folks are looking at, should I invest in SEO, or should I invest in Google pay-per-click and things like that? And then we recently had a guest on the podcast, and I'm forgetting her name right now, and I apologize if you're listening, because I forgot it's not coming to me, but she's the CMO of a law firm in Virginia. And it got me thinking, how do you determine when it's time to bring an in-house marketing person into your firm? So I don't have a specific question, but I want to ask you to kind of paint the picture in the growth of your firm, how you navigated marketing decisions, and when is it time to invest in the next thing? And when did you decide to bring somebody in-house to basically spearhead your marketing campaigns?
Yeah, well, I'm a firm believer in, first of all, setting the appropriate marketing budget. And so, we do it on a percent of the previous year's revenue or the forecasted revenue for this coming year. And it's fairly aggressive because we're reinvesting, but I want to make sure we're providing adequate dollars for marketing to fuel further growth. How do you spend that money? Well, and when do you bring it in-house? I guess you got to watch your responses and see what seems to be working. I think there's no area that's easier to waste money in than marketing, spending money in the wrong way. So you sure want to be able to track where people are responding. It's kind of imperfect when you advertise on TV, because a lot of people say, well, I found you on the internet, when if they hadn't seen your TV commercials, they might have looked at somebody else's site. So we just try to measure it by top of mind, asking people when they call in, well, what made you call, and that gives us some idea. But I think just by watching the marketing channels, see what's working. Years ago, we saw that we're spending a lot on the yellow pages and thought that it might be going the way of the dinosaur, and so we got out of it and put all that money in the internet before most people did. Turned out to be the right decision. So you've got to be able to shift within your marketing budget. As for bringing people in-house, I would rather have someone in-house every time if I can do it, if I can afford it, and if they're going to be good. When we outsource stuff, and we do, to agencies, we're depending on external talent. And sometimes we have a good rep and then they leave, and then we're stuck. So I would much rather, anything that's really worth doing is probably worth doing it yourself if you can find the right person and keep them. And so we brought our SEO in-house. We do use outside agencies for pay-per-click. We do use an outside agency for our TV ads, but our marketing department is super strong. We produce our own videos. We have a lot of talented people, and wherever possible, I like having things in-house.
Yeah, I love that, I think the one takeaway from what you just shared is if you're able to bring it in-house, you should. It's counterintuitive to what some people would think, right? You would think that, okay, if I go to an agency, I have multiple talents that each of them collectively can do better than maybe one person can do in-house. But at the same time, it's a really good point that well, what if one good person leaves at the other place? Where does that leave you? If at least you can kind of control. You can't control somebody to stay in your place, but if you're a good employer and you're doing a good job, and their personal situation is not changing, there's no reason for them to go anywhere. So let them grow with you, give them a path of growth, and they should be in for the long haul. You can also poach talent from an outside source if you find somebody really good. There's always that option too. As we're drawing towards the end of our conversation, I don't want to ignore the fact that you have as a side thing developed your own case management software. I want to just talk about that for a moment. What instigated, first of all, what's the name of the software? I think you told me it was GrowPath. So and it's primarily for PI firms and eminent domain firms. What motivated you to develop your own solution and then to commercialize it? And do you think that this is one of those big investments like TV commercials? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, we talked earlier about the importance of scaling, and we used to have paper systems, and then we went to software, case management systems. Over time, as we grew, we found that the existing case management solutions really weren't adequate for our needs. We were having to build a bunch of workarounds just to get the data that we wanted out of them. And so when we took on this Black Farmers case, which was a huge class action that resulted in over $1 billion recovery for our clients, we had tens of thousands of clients. And to manage that process, we needed really good software. So we decided after that case concluded, we were just going to build our own software for ourselves, which we did. And we use it, and it makes us better. Once we had built it and realized, the value there that it was adding for us, we decided to commercialize it and to allow it other firms to be able to use it. I think it's particularly strong at providing management data. I think to run a business, especially as you grow, you want to be watching the numbers. You've got to be able to get the right information out at real time. And it's got a lot of tools that really help us and its users work not only more efficiently, but also to make sure that you as a business owner know what's going on in the business on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love that. So is that operating as a separate business? You have to hire your separate people there, and it's really running completely on its own?
Yes, it's a separate company.
So how are you managing that? Are you hands off? Did you bring in a CEO to run it for you? And how did you actually decide to say, okay, this is something that I think is worth investing in?
I am not involved in the business. Early on I was a little bit as an interim measure, but I'm a better lawyer and law firm manager than I am a software industry leader. You know, talking about getting over your skis and overextending. Just because you're good at one thing in life doesn't mean you're going to be good at another. And so we've brought in an outside a CEO to run the business and hire their own people and build that up.
Okay. And one last question before I go to my closing questions, and that is, what do you think are what is the legacy that you're looking to leave? Is there, I mean, you've built this firm to this level. At some point, you're probably going to step away from it. You're going to retire, and I shouldn't assume that, right? I know people who worked well into their 90s, so it would be unfair for me to assume that you're going to step away completely. But once you grow your firm and you have financially you're secure, there's a different meaning out there that you might be pursuing, and I'm curious to know what it is for you. Like, what is the thing that you want to be remembered for, that you've done as a result of being able to achieve this level of success with the firm?
Yeah, well, it's funny that you ask. I just turned 60 this year, had 25 years here at the firm. When I started out, first it was just to do something meaningful and do it well. Then it was to build the most successful firm in North Carolina. It was sort of to prove something to the world. A lot of it was just to provide for my family and live a comfortable lifestyle. So in my mind, check, check, check. And here I am at age 60, and you have to, am I still motivated by the same things? No. I'm still motivated, highly motivated, but the source of the motivation has changed. I've noticed it changing. And so to your question, what motivates me now is legacy. And legacy is what people are going to say about you after you're gone, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I want to avoid any disgraceful situations that would undermine the legacy, but I also don't want to see this great law firm that we've built that is helping so many people and employing so many people fall apart. That would sort of, even if I'm in the grave and that happens, I would prefer if that's not the outcome. And so what I've been doing is working on setting up the firm for long-term success after I'm gone. Now, I don't have any imminent plans to retire. I like what I'm doing, and I'll be around for a while, but not forever. And so we're trying to groom another generation of leaders, instill the values, all the things that we built the firm on this group, so that we've got a management team that's able to take it and carry it on. So it's not about me anymore. It's about us and the legacy and continuing to do things the right way.
Yeah, and I think that we can probably come back and have a whole nother discussion on what that succession planning looks like, and how you navigate the ownership of the firm and partners and all of that stuff. Very interesting conversation to have at some point. I really appreciate your openness and honesty in this conversation. It's been eye-opening for me, and I'm sure for my listeners. So we appreciate your time and appreciate you being here. I always close out with two questions, and that is, what is the number one thought or tip that you want to leave our listeners with? And the second thing is how can they learn more about you or GrowPath, your law firm, and where do you want to send them if so that they're interested in continuing the conversation somehow with you?
Yeah. Well, in terms of a tip, we've mentioned a lot of things, and so I'll try to touch on something that we haven't already touched on. And that, to me, and that's something you've touched on, is the importance of coaching. It's so much easier if you have a good coach to help you figure stuff out. I've had that throughout. My dad, for a long time, served that function for me, and I have a coach right now. But I do think being able to step back, run things by someone, gets you out of your head, gives you the view of the business from a different perspective. The right coach can make a big difference in achieving your goals. First of all, identifying your goals and then helping you achieve them. So that would be, sort of my recommendation. If people want to learn more about me, the firm, GrowPath, I'll give, first of all, anybody can email me. It's the letter J, Farrin, Farrin, @farrin.com. Our website is www.farrin.com, and GrowPath is growpath.com. So those are the best ways to learn more, and love to hear from anybody who's interested.
Awesome. And Jim, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Folks, we're going to link up those URLs, the email address, all of that in the show notes. You can access the show notes at profitwithlaw.com, or just looking in the description in your podcast player. If you have not left us a rating or review yet, we would love to see you do that. Just like your law firm runs on reviews on Google, so does ours and the podcast player that you're listening to us on. So we would love it if you took a moment to leave a thought behind for us. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast and you love this conversation, you want to make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you get notified when we release a new episode. We're here every week, sometimes twice a week, and always bringing amazing content for you. And one last thing I want to remind you, Jim just brought up, getting coaching. If that's a new concept for you, we have the ability for you to join us for an absolutely free coaching session. Our coaches make room on their calendar every month to have just a handful of these free coaching calls with our listeners. And you can access that at profitwithlaw.com/free coaching, profitwithlaw.com/free coaching. At the end of the session, you'll potentially be offered an opportunity to join our paid coaching program, but it is not a sales call. It is a coaching session. So you will get coached for 45 minutes, absolutely free. There's no strings attached. You don't have to say yes to the offer at the end, but you will be given the opportunity, if you're a good fit, to join us in our elite law firm coaching program. Jim, thank you so much again. And folks, we'll catch you next week. Take care.